What's up? Welcome back to another video. It has been a long time, and a lot has happened in my life, and in the world, really, to bring us here, to this moment, recording this video. But that stuff is not what we're here to talk about. What we are here to talk about is some of the knowledge that I've gotten since I've accumulated enough books to justify building a bookshelf and using it as background for a video. The knowledge that we're specifically here to talk about is a little bit about American history. I think it's pretty important right now. I think we're in a very interesting time, and I think learning a bit about ourselves is definitely going to be helpful. And so, what we're here to talk about is this guy right here. This is the Federalist Papers, written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. I've wanted to read these for a very long time. Never got around to it. I think I was about 14 the first time I heard about these. I was watching the Daily Wire all the time. Oh, how things change. And I think it was Michael Knowles specifically who would talk about the Federalist Papers all the time and his interpretation of what we should take away from that today. Um, Fast forward 23, earlier this year, I started my journey of learning specifically about political philosophy, and that has led me here to this 1980s edition of the Federalist Papers that comes cross-referenced with a constitution in the back. And it has all the relevant Federalist Papers referenced to different sections of the Constitution. So we'll be going into that as we go along this journey. But basically, what we're doing today is we're starting a series. I'm going to be reading these. I'm going to be typing up. Um, a little bit of my reflections about each of the papers or collections of papers, and we will discuss and try to figure out what we can learn from that situation to apply to today's world. So I'll give a brief introduction of what exactly these are, what their purpose is, the context they were written in, and then we'll jump into the first of the 85 articles in here, um, and kind of talk about that. So let's go. So, as I said, the Federalist Papers were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. They were written at the time that we were drafting the Constitution in 1787, and they basically comprise of arguments for the Constitution. The Federalists wanted the Constitution to pass. Anti-Federalists were against the Constitution and the strong federal government it would create, and to convince what you might call the first swing state of New York to adopt the Constitution and ratify it as law. We had Hamilton, who was from New York, Madison, and Jay, write these letters to the New York newspapers and publish them as the debates went on to convince people to take up the Constitution. So there's a very brief introduction of what these are and what their purpose was. And now let me read a little bit from the introduction here, the introduction by Clinton Rossiter. The Federalist is the most important work in political science that has ever been written or is likely ever to be written in the United States. It is indeed the one product of the American mind that is rightly counted among the classics of political theory. So that I just find a little bit interesting. Just the that speaks to the impact that these things have had and the guiding force that they've had on our culture. I mean, you'll find these referenced everywhere to suit very different interests. We'll get into that as we go along. Just a little bit more information. Hamilton wrote most of these. Madison comes in second, and Jay only wrote about five, or exactly five as far as we can tell. Not so much because Madison or Jay didn't care, it's because they didn't live in New York, and just simply were not able to stay long enough for the entire run of the Federalist Papers being published. Um, so we're going to find Hamilton writes over 50 of these, I believe. I forget, it's in here somewhere. Oh, here we go. Here we go. So it says here Hamilton wrote 51 of the papers, Madison 26, and Jay 5. At the time of recording, I've read 13 of them. They're incredibly interesting, although they take a lot of focus to understand. It is old time writing and also written by lawyers, so they're very eloquent, very good at arguments, although it can be kind of hard to follow along at times. So I write notes in here, do my best to understand it and interpret it to today's world and bring them to you. All right. So let's get into the first one, uh, written by Hamilton. It's only a few pages. We'll give a brief summary and then I'll talk about what I think we can learn from it. All right. One more quick note is that these were written under the alias of a man named Publius or Publius. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I've only read it. I'll check that before the next video. But they present the three authors as one man, which I think is very interesting. Kind of let the ideas speak for themselves. And the introduction talks a lot about that. We're not going to be talking a whole lot about that. I just wanted to give you that little bit of information here before we get into it. So this copy that I have also has brief descriptions of the papers as it lists in the table of contents. So I'm going to read just that brief description really quickly, just that way we can kind of get a kind of feel for what's going on here. So it's been labeled the introduction. Hamilton opens the discussion by outlining the plan for this series of papers. He celebrates the American Union, derides the Articles of Confederation, and summons his countrymen to the fateful mission of experimenting with free government in behalf of all mankind. So that is the brief description of what he goes on to talk about here. This one is considered one of the most important of the papers. Um, there's a list of the most important ones. So the very first thing Hamilton mentions in this paper is the inefficacy of the Articles of Confederation and a call for the new Constitution to be adopted. He speaks about how the fate of an empire is the most interesting thing that could possibly grip a person's attention. It's a matter of such extravagance and importance that anyone living through times where these questions get brought up are swept up by the idea and can't help but pay attention to it. He's talking about how the destiny of the Union is at stake, and that destiny or providence, as the founders so often talked about, seems to have left an important question up to the American people, and that question that he's talking about is whether a government could be established by, quote, reflection and choice rather than accident or force. He warns us about how this debate for the future is of such magnitude and importance that it is bound to be corrupted by individual interests. It can't be avoided. He mentions how individual interests will resist the public good and will resist what's best for the Union in an attempt to divide it and use it to profit and to gain self enrichment at the expense of the American people. He recognizes that many good men have been tricked by individual interests and end up on the wrong side of history because of it. He also writes that we should have moderation in our confidence of the right or the wrong in any such case, because we can't even really be sure if people who advocate for the truth have been influenced by fact or by individual interests. Even people who are on the right side of history might not be there for the right purposes. He states that there is nothing more ill judged than intolerance, and that heresies in either religion and politics can rarely be cured by persecution. Hamilton, through Publius, directs our attention to a certain error in judgment that he describes more often a mistake of the head rather than the heart, which I think is kind of important, and we'll get kind of to the root of that later. But what he's talking about is whether or not to trust the government, which I think is funny. I imagine you're seeing the parallels already. He argues that a distrust of the government in regards to your personal rights and liberties is a misjudgment based on a jealousy to protect those rights. He says, quote, An enlightened zeal for the energy and efficiency of government will be stigmatized as the offspring of a temper fond to despotic power and hostile to the principles of liberty. He believes this is mistaken. He writes that jealousy is the usual symptom of violent love, and that the noble enthusiasm of liberty is too apt to be infected with a spirit of narrow and illiberal distrust. Despite the fault in judgment that he sees here, he's quick to point out that just as wise men fall to the wrong side of history due to individual interest, that these beliefs stem from a place, quote, not unfriendly to the new Constitution. So rather than damning his enemies, he reminds us to use empathy, and he states, the vigor of government is essential to the security of liberty, that, in the contemplation of a sound and well-informed judgment, their interests can never be separated. So he then goes on to end the paper talking about some of the themes and topics that will be discussed later on, including the utility of the Union, the insufficiency of the present Confederation to preserve the Union, the necessity of an energetic government, and arguments that the Constitution fits the bill. So there's a brief breakdown of Federalist 1. It's not everything that's in the paper, but if I did include more, I'd basically just be reading it to you. You can go do that yourself. It's 3 pages. I will link in the description places where you can both read or listen to it for free if you're so inclined. So let's talk about what we can learn from this first Federalist paper. And you might already have some ideas just by hearing me talk about it. So today, we're almost exactly 250 years since we've declared independence and started this nation. And everywhere we look, I think we can see that these ideas that the founding fathers fought for are every day being challenged. And I think individual interest is probably the most obvious example here, which is what he spends basically this entire paper talking about. I think one of the first lessons that we can find here is the importance to be interested in the world that you live in and the nation that you have been born to. After all, the fate of the nation is the fate of us. And I do think that there's something to the captivating interest that he describes at the start of the Federalist paper. Too often we're burnt out and nihilistic about where things are going. We're bombarded with information, most of it bad. And this is done in hopes that we'll disassociate and just kind of let individual interests take root and do what they'll do. They don't want you to be interested in these things because the more you're interested, the less they can get away with. As Publius says, they want to divide up the Union so that way they can profit from it. These are words that were written 250 years ago, and ask yourselves, how true does that sound to you today? It sounds very true to me. So I think it's important to remain interested. Remember that the actions of the rich and powerful do have material effects on our lives. It's not just a different world that is unrelated to us. It's our world. It's our country that they are messing with. And remember that we do have the power to affect change, whether or not that's organizing and starting a movement or communicating like this. Even if we just talk about these kind of things with our friends and family, that sows the seeds to think about it more deeply and to form opinions, and that will eventually translate to material change. It will affect how they look at the world and the actions that they take in it, change voting habits, change who takes power in this country, change how decisions get made. And so this stuff is very important to pay attention to be interested in. The next thing, and the thing that I keep talking about because it's very important, is individual interests, okay? In affairs of this scale, the fate of nations, in our case, the richest and most powerful nation that has ever existed, the effects of our decisions will echo throughout time, will echo throughout this earth, just like the financial crisis in 2008 reached different countries at different times and destroyed economies and communities. The same will happen with whatever decisions we make in the future. In a world so interconnected and dependent on each other, it's no longer good enough to just act in the for the public good of our nation, like Publius talks about. We have to work for the common good of all people on the earth. in the greatest of all affairs, like the one that we're talking about, the fate of the United States, and with it, the fate of the world, what individuals stand to gain from taking advantage of us now is too great for men who lack morals and will to not try to exploit and take everything that they can. It's up to the good and wise men of the world to stop this from happening and work in the public good and for the freedom of all people. We know who these individual interests are. They're the capitalists, they're the billionaires, they're the people who own everything, who are always seeking to divide us, just as Publius wrote. The neoliberalism of the past 50 or so years has left the United States with broken institutions that serve corporations rather than people. It leaves us with a lot of questions to ask ourselves. Who serves who? What serves who? Are these human constructions of economy and money here to serve us, the people, and make our lives better? Or do we somehow exist to create wealth for the shareholder and the CEO? Are we free or are we slaves to this system? What does society exist for? People or money? These are the questions that will determine our future and the fate of our nation and the fate of the world. And once again, on the topic of individual interests, Publius warns us about the information that we get. He warns us that we can never be sure who's influencing what we think. And we can see this everywhere today. Corporate media is quickly being bought up by billionaires. It's consolidated. It only shows you what they want you to see. And now you might think this is the part where I'm about to try to sell you ground news or something. But let me tell you, I have ground news. And what it's shown me more than anything is that any big corporate news organization is basically going to give you the same information as everything else. There's hardly any difference reading an article from CNN to NBC to Fox News to the BBC. There's not much difference because they're all owned by the same individual interests. They try their best to convince us that they're different, but it's really just all the rich people trying to convince you to fight each other rather than fight them, the individual interests who are ransacking our nation. Let's also touch on the grace that Publius extends to his opposition. He doesn't claim that people who are against the Constitution are stupid or evil. He merely thinks that they're misinformed. This is what he's talking about when he says these problems are more an issue of the head rather than the heart. He thinks that most people's hearts are in the right place and they want to see their nation do good and they want to see their fellow citizens do good. It's the information they've been fed that misleads them. They've been led to believe things that aren't true, that do not help them. And I'm sure that we're all very familiar with misinformation today. It comes out of the woodwork wherever you look, wherever they don't want you to know something. And so once again, we return to individual interests. The people themselves are not so much to blame. They want what's best. It's the individual interests who feed them lies and misinformation and skewed talking points that lean in their favor. So I think that's something we can learn right there is to have empathy for our fellow citizens. Remember that most people are just looking for what's best. To they're just trying to make it in this world just like the rest of us. And just because they have different ideas does not make them stupid, does not make them evil, does not make them your enemy. Your neighbor is not your enemy. The guy that you don't like at work is not your enemy. Somebody who has a different political opinion than you is not your enemy. Who is your enemy are the people who are actively taking the wealth of this nation for themselves, are the people who want you to stay fighting your neighbor, fighting your coworker, fighting your fellow citizen. So the last specific point we'll talk about from this paper is Hamilton's discussion of strong government versus personal liberty. He thinks that those things go hand in hand. He says that they can't be separated. He believes that a strong government is essential to securing your personal freedoms. And I definitely think I agree with him. I won't pretend that I don't. But you know what's interesting is that after 250 years, we're still talking about this same problem. It speaks to the timelessness of these papers and how important they are even still today. So, like I said, on the one side you have Hamilton, who believed that a strong government is essential to securing personal freedom, and also not just strong, efficient and effective government. And then on the other side, you have people who he describes as jealously guarding their personal freedom. Again, he thinks that it's a mistake to distrust the government for your personal freedom because he thinks that it's essential in securing it. But this is pretty similar to the argument that we see today. I mean, on the right, we see people holding basically the same view that government is bad, that everything it does will infringe on our freedom, and that we have to guard our rights against it at all times. But on the left, you don't exactly see, you know, Hamilton's exact take. You kind of see something more along the lines of people recognizing that the government is corrupt and shouldn't be trusted, while at the same time running to it to try to defend the rights of minorities and marginalized groups, um, which seems a little nonsensical. It seems like the one thing that we do agree on today is that the government is bad and corrupt and doesn't represent us. Um, so this is a fundamental difference between the argument that Hamilton presents 250 years ago. He seems to be working on the assumption that the government represents us and will act to protect our rights. And I think that speaks volumes about the situation they were in as compared to the situation that we are in today. We seem to have actually gone backwards, and to the point that we can't even have this discussion. We cannot even have the discussion that Hamilton was having 250 years ago because we cannot even trust the government. We're not even there. We're not even to the point where we could debate a constitution. We've fallen back. Hamilton is working from the perspective of somebody who is crafting a strong government to represent the people, to enshrine their rights and protect them. And our rights today are only as strong as the institutions that are made to protect them. And it seems that these great foundations that have been left for us have been slowly eroded by personal interests, by corporate interests, by billionaire interests, in for the purpose of dividing the union and profiting off of us, extracting the wealth from us for their personal benefit. And so once again, it all goes back to personal interests, individual interests, the interests of private equity, of big capital, of big business, big finance, tech, the oligarchs that run this country. It all goes back there, right here in Federalist 1. The very first argument for the Constitution talks about the exact issues we have today, and in such a way that it seems that they were further ahead in this conversation than we are. And so I think that the biggest takeaway here is that we need to get to that point where personal interests are expelled from the government, are expelled from our systems, that our systems work for us again. That is what we need to do. So that's pretty much it for the first Federalist paper. I find it really astounding how relevant it is today and how timeless it is, and how we find the same themes of freedom versus government versus tyranny, of a strong government, of a weak government, debates of right and wrong, having healthy skepticism of your opinions, corruption and individual interest, themes of unity, confidence in your fellow people, the nearly boundless empathy that he has for his opposition. It's all so relevant and so important for us to remember today. He offers us, many tools of, reflection, moderation, like I already said, skepticism, all these things, to help us fight against these individual interests, all in the interests to see if we can create and keep a government created by reflection and choice rather than force. So that's pretty much all I got for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope the audio is good. I'm trying to use this mic, but I got to record it on my computer. I don't know how that's going to translate to being able to use the audio from the phone or the video from the phone. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. I got a lot of stuff planned. Obviously, I'm going to be going over the rest of the Federalist Papers I want to write. I want to make videos about all of them. I also want to make a lot of videos about these books and the things I've learned. I've read a lot of political philosophy specifically, but also a lot of ecological stuff, climate stuff, sociology stuff, whole bunch of stuff, lots of stuff, everywhere stuff. So if you did enjoy, if you learned something, I would very much appreciate it. If you liked, if you commented, if you subscribed, it helps a lot. Um, and tune in next time. I'll see you for Federalists number 2 through 5 by John Jay. We're doing it all together because they're all related to each other. So, yeah, stay tuned, stay safe, stay curious. I'll see you in the next one.